Okay, so now we know after we did our Crime Writers Week in April that a ton of our ProWritingAid community are crime writers. And so today we have invited Dea Parkin, who's the secretary of the Crime Writers Association, and Leigh Russell, who's the chair of the Debut Dagger judges, to come and give you all the insider information so that you can submit your manuscript in the best possible way. So they're about to appear out of the ether. Hi Leigh, hi Dee.
Hello everybody.
Hi everybody, hi.
Hi, great. Well, thank you for being here. I know that after Crime Writers Week, there were a lot of people who were talking about entering their book that they've been working on in the award. And so I'm hoping that this session will make them feel really inspired to do it and get it done and get it entered. And will also help them get their manuscript in the best possible shape for when they enter it and just increase their chances. So do each of you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, we'll do that, Lisa. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Leigh Russell, I'd like to introduce her first. And Leigh is chair of the Debut Dagger judging panel. She's had 27 books published. Quite an achievement, 20 of which are police procedurals, mainly featuring Geraldine Steele, but she's also written psychological thrillers, dystopian novels, and a historical as the latest one. She's been shortlisted for the CWA John Creasy New Blood Dagger, and she's a consultant fellow to the Royal Literary Fund. So you're in very good company with Leigh.
Thank you very much, Dee. Well, I have to say we're extremely fortunate to have Dea Parkin with us tonight because she is a very busy lady. She not only runs the Debut Dagger competition, she's also secretary of the Crime Writers Association. She's editor-in-chief of Fiction Feedback, which is a leading editorial consultancy, and she's a published author. So there are a lot of demands on Dee's time, and we're very lucky to have her with us tonight. So Dee, I wanted to ask you a few questions about the Debut Dagger, just to kick us off. And perhaps we could start by you could tell us a little bit about who the Debut Dagger is really aimed at. What are the benefits of entering for the Debut Dagger for writers?
Okay, first of all, it's really good for anyone who wants to get a crime novel published, anyone at all. And it's good for them, first of all, because it's a great discipline to enter competitions. It really gets your confidence lifted if you can produce the opening of a crime novel and get that into such a state that you feel confident to send it off to a competition. That is a great thing. It does wonders for your ego, honestly, and it makes you feel much better about your writing and much more confident. But the Debut Dagger is more than just a writing competition. It also means that if you get shortlisted, your novel opening will be sent to agents and publishers who specialise in crime in the UK. And out of the people who've been shortlisted, we have a fantastic success record. For example, from last year, 2021, we had 6 shortlisted. One has an agent and a publisher. Another had 6 agents competing to represent her, and she's now got a grant as well to finish the novel. And another got an agent and is just finalising the first book deal this week, which is terrific news. So congratulations to those authors. In 2020, again, we've had at least 4 out of the 6, and they're the ones that we've heard of, who have got agents and are on some way towards getting published. Some of them are already published, or they're being published next year, which is fantastic news. And obviously that's brilliant for us and brilliant for the authors. So the Debut Dagger is about getting published. But if you're thinking that you would prefer to self-publish, then I think it's still for you as well, because it means so much on your CV if you get longlisted or shortlisted for the Debut Dagger. And as we were saying, it also inspires you with confidence that this is for you. And I think that's one of the most important things.
Yes, I agree. you mentioned that a very high proportion of long-listed and shortlisted writers do go on to get publishing deals. What if an author has already been published or has a literary agent? What are the problems there?
Yeah, well, it is the debut dagger for a reason, Leigh. I mean, that's the reason we call it debut dagger. It is intended to be of use to unpublished authors and to people who don't already have a publisher and who don't already have an agent. So the rules as they stand up now, and they have been changed this year, so in your ears back, this is important information. If you've had a novel traditionally published before, then I'm afraid you're not eligible. If you've self-published a novel and it was over 5 years ago, then you are eligible, but not if it was more recent than that. If you've had a book published, but it was non-fiction, that's fine, you're eligible. This is for novelists. So the big rule is if you've had anything over 20,000 words of fiction published before, then do look very carefully through the rules on the website, because you'll probably find that you're not eligible. But if, say, you've had a couple of short stories published in a magazine or in an anthology, then as long as it's not more than 20,000 words, you should be eligible. So, yes. So that's good news.
Yes, I think, and as you said, I mean, it sounds quite complicated, but all of that information is available on the website. So please, those of you who are hearing this for the first time, don't feel under any pressure to start writing down everything Dee's saying. You can see it all on the website. And I think our idea here is really that we want to try and make it as level a playing field as we can. And people who have had novels published before will have been through an editing process. And so that gives them possibly an unfair advantage. So this is for new writers, debut writers, really. That's the idea of it. But yeah, do have a look on the
absolutely.
On the
yeah, I mean, we would definitely advise you to even before you start thinking about submitting, to go and have a look at those rules. It's under competitions on the CWA.co.uk. It's pretty easy to find, and have a good read through, because there's nothing worse, is there, than you put something together and then you discover at the last minute that actually maybe I'm not eligible. But it's pretty clear, the rules, and if you've not been published before, then we really look forward to reading your novel. That'd be fantastic.
Yes, and just a word, Dee, about multiple entries. Are people, just in case anybody has more than one novel?
Yeah, well, we've had that before, and people are very welcome to submit as many entries as they like, but the only thing is only one per person can reach the long list. We think that's the fairest way of going about it. I must say it's not happened much before, but it has happened, and that's fantastic. Obviously, if your entry is going to be even considered more than once for the long list. But no, that's the rule, to give everyone a fair chance.
And again, I think that's all made clear on the website, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Do read the rules on the website carefully, and there are some things that have to be followed fairly strictly. The competition closes on, is it the last working day in February at 6
That's right, yeah.
6 p.m. GMT.
GMT, yeah, absolutely, Leigh. Yeah, that's so important, because we have had, international, because obviously it's an international competition, and we have had people inquiring before, 6 p.m. when? and it is British time, so that's GMT. So yes, do make a note of that. And we'd also ask that you give yourself the best possible chance, really, by making sure that you can enter maybe a couple of days before, rather than leaving it right until the deadline. And one of the reasons we say that is because inevitably there's sometimes problems either with payment or for the fee, or else there can be a technical issue because so many people are entering on the deadline at 6 p.m. and you don't want to suddenly find yourself stuck and then it's past 6 p.m. Then what do you do? I mean, the answer would be you contact us, obviously, and we'd look after you the next day as best we can. But please do yourself a favour and try and enter maybe a couple of days beforehand, so if you do experience any problems, you're not panicking too much.
Yes, and think about poor Dee, who, you know, would really have to cope with a whole tsunami of entries if everybody left it until the last day.
I do have to cope with the whole tsunami. It happens every year.
The internet would crash with all the entries.
Yes, well, one year it did, but we sorted that out. But yes, this is why we actually moved it to 6 p.m. People who've entered in the past might remember that it used to be midnight.
Yeah.
And this is why we changed it, because there were so many people, you know, saying, oh, I've not finished, or I've this, that, or the other, the payment's not come through. What do I do now? And I was still fielding calls and fielding emails at 2 in the morning. So yeah, we put it to a more civilized hour.
And of course, as writers, we do have to respect deadlines, because when you get a publishing contract, your publisher will give you a deadline and you can't mess about with that. So, you know, you need to be able to respect deadlines. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that's all been very useful to everybody. And as I say, all the information is on the website. So moving on from there, Dee, I think there's nothing more to say about process particularly, is there?
I don't think so, but maybe people would be interested just before we go on to how you can make the entry the best it possibly can be. Maybe people would be interested in some comments that we've had from people. We've got Caroline Carver, who very kindly gave me a lovely quote. She was the winner of the Debut Dagger in 1999. So some time ago, and she's now an established crime writer. She's had lots of books published, and she says the main way the Debut Dagger influenced my career was that it freed me to become the writer I wanted to be. And in all honesty, I never looked back. It allowed me to extend myself into the world of thriller writing with confidence, supported by members of the CWA, who from the first thing were fantastic. And the other aspect was publicity. The Dagger gave me a story to tell, one with gravitas, and which made people take me seriously. So that was good. And then I also heard from Mike Craven, and that's MW Craven, who was shortlisted in 2013. Didn't win, but was shortlisted. And therefore his entry was sent to agents and publishers. And he says, the Debut Dagger is potentially life-changing. On the back of being shortlisted in 2013, I got an agent and a publishing deal. I'm now a Sunday Times best-selling author, have been translated into 22 languages, and in 2019, I won the Gold Dagger. There's even a Washington Post coffee and a Washington Post tour of Cumbria. Washington Post is character, as anyone who's read his fantastic books will know. There is no doubt in my mind, Mike says, whatsoever, that the genesis of all this is the Debut Dagger. So there you go. Right then, so we better get on to explaining how you can best make your entry really stand up when it comes to the judging. And I've got a few questions for Leigh. So first of all, Leigh, we've only got 3,000 words. There's 3,000 words and 1,500 words allowed for a synopsis. But for the 3,000 words, a lot of people ask me, well, in my novel, nothing really exciting happens until after the 3,000 words. Should I do something about that for entering the competition?
I would say, yeah, I would say probably yes, because if you think about it, the judges, myself included, we are all readers, and the other judges are very well-known editors for major publishing houses. They're leading literary agents, and they're all very, very experienced readers. And I mean, I've read for more years probably than most of you have been alive. So we are coming to this as readers. And I'll just tell you very briefly about the judging process. All entries are read by at least 2 readers, and a long list is then selected, which goes to the judges. And we then read them all, discuss them, we score them. And it's a very, very rigorous process, because we're very aware that this is a really important competition, and it can, as Dee said, it can change people's lives. So we take the judging process very seriously. Now, as readers, you think about when you pick up a book. If you've read 3,000 words of a book and nothing much has happened and nothing has grabbed you, you might read on, but you might well not. And so as judges, as readers, we need to have some sort of hook, something that grabs us and makes us turn the pages. And we all do this, don't we? Amazon know this. They have the Kindle function where you can read the opening of a book before you buy it. If you go into a bookshop or a library, you pick up a book and you don't immediately buy it. You might just read the first page and see if you like it, if it grabs you or not. So I think as a general rule, not just for this competition, the first 3,000 words are probably pretty significant. And if you feel that your opening 3,000 words are just kind of a slow build up to when things really start to happen, I think you might consider the structure of your book and maybe start a little bit further in with something happening. And then you can put in a bit of exposition and build up to it. You can drip feed that in later on. But readers want to be drawn in. We want to be gripped. And I think as a writer, if you've not drawn your reader in the first 3,000 words, then possibly readers might not continue. And so there's no rules about this. It's whatever you can make work. There's no rule that says something must happen in the first 3,000 words. It doesn't have to. It's your writing. The ultimate decision is yours. But my advice would be that in general, it is better to have some kind of hook within the first 3,000 words that is going to make the judges think, well, this has really got something. I think I'd want to read on. I'd want to read more of this. Does that make sense to you, Dee?
It certainly does, Leigh. Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I think that you can't afford a slow burn in a competition for the opening of a crime novel. I think it's as simple as that. There's got to be a hook, as you say. There's got to be, so even if it's a premise, rather than, you know, just the discovery of a body or something, there's got to be something really intriguing about it that, as Leigh says, makes you want to read on. That's really important. Yes. Okay, so in our first 3,000 words then, Leigh, what happens about number of characters? Because maybe if you only have one character, you're not really doing justice to your novel, and you feel that perhaps it's not zinging off the page like it might. But there again, should you have, you know, more than that? How many more than that? If you've got a lot of characters, is that perhaps too many?
I think if you just introduce your protagonist, and again, there are no rules, and some people will just have one character and do it brilliantly. But in general, I would say your protagonist needs to have an antagonist. There needs to be some kind of conflict, some kind of hindrance to your protagonist achieving what they set out to do. So to achieve that with just one character, I think is going to be quite a challenge. There's no limit to the number of characters you can introduce, but I think it's important we always want to evoke a response in our readers to our characters. And I think just as if you only have one character, it might become a little bit too much internal monologue. It might become, you know, not as gripping as it could be. I think if you have too many characters, then you might not have enough words to really flesh them out and make your characters come alive. So you don't want to spread your talents at creating characters too thinly, in which case your characters might become a bit sketchy and superficial. But at the same time, if you're just going to have one character, then who are they going to come up against that is going to interest us? Who are they going to work with? Who are they going to, as they have some conflict with? I think it would make it probably more difficult. But at the end of the day, it is your decision. And in writing, there are no rules, and you have to trust yourself as the writer. But for me, yeah, I think I don't want lots and lots of characters who are I'm not really going to lodge in my mind, and I might not remember who they all are. But I think I would want more than one character just to make this a little bit more interesting for the main character.
I think that's a good general guide, Leigh, isn't it? I mean, like you say, there's always exceptions. There's always people who can pull off something completely startling and apparently, you know, turn all our expectations on their heads. But yeah, I think that's pretty good guidance. You know, maybe more than one, but not too many. Okay. But talking about characters, and I ought to point out as well that characterization is one of the things that our readers look for when they're looking at all the entries. So it is important that you have the space to properly flesh out the characters. But looking at characters, One thing that we've come across before in entries, in Debut Dagger entries, is that maybe someone has a novel that's told from one person's viewpoint and then it switches perhaps later on. Now, what would your advice be there, Leigh? Do you think they should try and get more, if they're going to have a novel that's got two viewpoints in it, should they perhaps be looking at trying to get both of those viewpoints across in their 3,000 words?
That's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, ideally, I guess, yes, the judges, the readers might want to see both your viewpoints. You might have multiple viewpoints. I mean, in my books, they're written mainly from the detective's point of view, but you also see the killer's point of view, you see her colleague's point of view, you might see a victim's point of view, witness's point of view. Well, I couldn't pack all of that into 3,000 words. So there is a limit, isn't there? We do have your synopsis, and I think it can be made clear in the synopsis that you have different narrative voices, two or possibly more in your writing. So if the way your writing works out is that we only have one narrative voice in the first 3,000 words, I wouldn't want you to feel you have to try and shoehorn something else in if it just doesn't work. All long-listed entries are asked to submit a further 3,000 words from later on in the novel. So if you are long-listed, you do have the opportunity to show us your second narrative voice or other narrative voices. But it's, as with so much in writing, it's kind of a balancing act. And what you are trying to do is showcase the very best that you can do. And if you feel that writing in different narrative voices actually is your greatest strength, then you might want to display that in your first 3,000 words. But as I say, I wouldn't want anyone to feel they've got to sort of cut and paste and shoehorn things if it doesn't quite work. So it's a judgment call. I know that's not very helpful to say, it's up to you, there's no answer. But I mean, that is the case with so much, isn't it?
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, when it comes down to it, everything about writing is subjective, and that's not only for our readers and our judges, but also ultimately for agents, publishers, and then for the book's readers themselves. Everyone will have a different view on things. But yeah, I think that's good general guidance, Leigh, isn't it? It's something for our entrants to be aware of. I think that's good. Okay, something else that I sometimes get asked, which always makes me giggle a little bit, but people sometimes ask, what about swearing? Are you allowed to swear in a competition entry?
Yes, I mean, obviously you're allowed to do whatever you want to do. I think, well, for me personally, and of course we're all different, but I'm absolutely fine with swearing in dialogue. There are sometimes characters who just wouldn't seem authentic if their language was all, cleaner than clean. A lot of people do use, I mean, I sometimes do myself, use swear words. And but in your own prose, it's not a no-no, but I'm not a great fan of it, because to me and apologies to anyone here who uses a lot of swear words in their prose, and a lot of excellent writers do, but to me it feels a little bit like lazy writing. I think there must be a better word. There must be a word that better expresses what you want to say in your prose. But just on this subject, and saying that, my own preference, I certainly wouldn't rule anybody out because they use swear words, but we do have a number of readers, and your submission will be read by at least 2 people. Every submission is read by at least 2 people. And we also have a very detailed scoring system, which is really designed by the CWA to make sure that our judgments, the readers and then later on the judges, are as objective as possible, because we're judging on a number of different criteria. So whereas a literary agent or a publisher might read just a page and think, no, this is not my cup of tea. I mean, I know this happens, it's happened to me. Publishers will say doesn't really fit our list, whatever. They don't have to read the whole thing. But with the Debut Dagger, we read your whole submission. It's not the whole book, obviously, but we read your whole submission very carefully, and we apply quite rigorous judging criteria to it in an endeavour to be as objective as possible. And the judges do spend a lot of time discussing the shortlist after going through this judging process. Yeah, in terms of swearing, to come back to the question, if that's your style, I wouldn't want to cramp anybody's style. I was just giving my own personal view on it, really.
Okay, thanks very much, Leigh. Thanks for that. Okay, I sometimes get asked about the word count, the 3,000 word count. I've had somebody say to me sometimes, well, you know, my first 2 chapters just come to 2,000 words. Should I just submit my first 2,000, because then the 3rd chapter would take it well over the 3,000? And certainly I always advise people to make the most of the word count. But sometimes people say, yeah, but you know, where do I finish it? Do I finish it mid-chapter? Do I finish it mid-sentence? You know, where that 3,000 words, you know, what sort of view should I take on that? I mean, is it a strict or a rigid requirement that we don't go over 3,000?
Yes, it is basically. It's a bit like the 6 p.m. on the last working day in February. Yes, we have a cut-off point at 3,000 words, and we've discussed this at some length. And really, we have to have a cut-off point somewhere. And you know, if we allow, okay, you can have an extra 100 words. Well, then what about 150 words? So no, 3,000 words is our cut-off point. Probably not the best idea to stop mid-sentence, but you can certainly stop mid-chapter. No reason why you shouldn't do that. And do remember, as I mentioned before, that the judges, well, certainly the other judges are leading literary agents and publishers, and they spend their lives reading submissions and synopses. They are very experienced at reading a synopsis and seeing straight away, oh yes, I can see how this book is going to pan out. They can read a 500-word synopsis. We all know that you've condensed 80 or 90,000 words into 500 words. You have to leave a lot out. In fact, talking about synopsis, I'll just say a few words about this. A synopsis is a summary of what happens in your book. It is not a pitch. So we don't want things like in an exciting climax, or this intriguing character, or a mysterious turn of events. We will make up our own minds whether it's exciting or intriguing or mysterious. Do not try in any synopsis to guide your reader's response. You just say what happens. There is a lot of research online about how to write synopses. And if you go onto the CWA website and just search on the main page for synopsis, you will see some advice from one of the Debut Dagger readers about writing a synopsis. There's lots of advice online. And I really think if you're not quite sure, because it's a hugely difficult thing to do, to write a synopsis, and it always makes your really brilliant story sound a little bit daft. I mean, you know, there's the sort of trope of the synopsis of Hamlet, you know, and in the end, so many people die, and it just sounds silly. And it's the most wonderful play ever written, in many people's opinion. But we do have your synopsis, but we do expect it to be written as a synopsis. And I do suggest, if you're not quite sure what to do, that you do research this online and get it right. Because I don't think we've ever rejected a submission out of hand just because the synopsis was not written properly as a synopsis. But I suspect, you know, editors and agents probably would. So it's a good skill to learn how to write a synopsis. And we actually all know how to do it, because if you might see a friend and they say, oh, what was that film about? I'm never going to get around to watching it. Tell me what it was about. And you just tell them what the film's about. That's a synopsis. What did you do today? You don't tell your partner or your friend every single little thing you've done. You pick up the main things and you report them. That's a synopsis. So do research how to write a synopsis if you're not sure.
Yeah, I know that sometimes we've had entrants who perhaps entered in the past, and they're not sure whether their synopsis should carry on from their first 3,000 words, or whether it should be for the whole thing. Now, actually, it doesn't matter. It really is entirely up to you which you prefer to do. But I always think that because the judges are so used to looking at a synopsis for the entire novel, then I think that's probably where to come down on. So yeah, you know, take your synopsis from the top rather than from the end of your 3,000 words.
And don't forget, if you go on to win and your entry is going to be submitted to publishers, you won't have to write a synopsis because you'll have done it.
Good point. Yeah. And for the people who say, should the synopsis actually say who the killer was and what happens at the end, the answer is yes. It's not a synopsis if it doesn't tell you that.
Yes,
So
yeah. Yes. because whoever is reading your synopsis, they need to know that you are able to give your reader some kind of closure. You're able to come to the end of the book. You don't just leave it hanging in midair. So readers read a whole book and then get near the, get to the end and, oh, so what, where's the ending? So yes, you do need to say what happens, and you need to solve all the mysteries in the synopsis.
Yeah, I mean, for the purposes of the Debut Dagger competition, I mean, the originality of plot, we can't, that's one of the scoring criteria, and we can't actually measure that by any other way apart from the synopsis. So it is really important that you include the important plot points in that synopsis. Like Leigh says, there's a lot of information out there on the web, and we will try and put a little bit more up as time goes on and we get closer to that 28th of February deadline, and we'll try and put a bit more up on the website for you. Okay, so moving on, Leigh. I'm also often asked about genre. People sometimes assume that if their novel isn't police procedural, then we're not going to be interested, or they might say, well, it's a spy thriller. Is that of interest for the Debut Dagger? What's the answer?
Yes, I think crime is a very broad church, isn't it? And any novel that has a crime in it somewhere could be classed as a crime novel. It doesn't have to be a police procedural. You don't have to have a police officer involved at all. Yeah, I'd say as broad as you like. I mean, there are so many subgenres of crime, aren't there? There's domestic noir, there's hard-boiled, there's police procedurals, there's psychological thrillers. But yes, if you have a crime in your novel, then that will fall into the category of crime fiction. Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's nice and straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just before we take questions, can we just talk a bit about what we have to help our debut, our would-be debut entrants, Leigh, and how they can find out more information?
Yes, of course. Okay, so we have a Facebook group which is open to anyone who is interested in the Debut Dagger competition, and that is simply called The Debuts. And if you ask to join that, I tend to I will let people join if they answer. There's a few questions saying, what is your interest in the Debut Dagger? And if people don't bother to answer any of the questions, then I tend not to allow them to enter. But you just have to say, I'd like to write a crime novel. I'm thinking of writing a crime novel. I like reading crime, very, very basic and simple. Anything that shows you have some interest in the crime fiction genre. And so that's quite a busy little Facebook page. And people do put up questions about, can you give me a link about how to write a synopsis? And other people will respond, or I might respond. So that's worth joining, I think. And we also offer, the CWA offer a range of critiques on manuscripts, and we devised one which is really specifically aimed at Debut Dagger entrants, although it's open to everybody. You don't have to be entering the Debut Dagger for this, but it's only £93, and you submit, I think it is 3,000 words, isn't it, Dee? You submit 3,000 words, and a
Yeah,
synopsis.
you submit your opening and the synopsis, so a maximum of 4,500,
Right,
which
yes.
does mean if you had a short story perhaps that you were thinking about entering for the Marjorie Allingham short mystery competition, which is the other competition the CWA runs, and then you could also enter it for the mini critic. I say enter, submit for the mini critic, which is quite useful. And we have found, I mean, like Leigh says, we did design this particularly with debut dagger entrants in mind, and we do find that it gets very popular in the run up to that 28th of February deadline. Yeah, we start putting a date by which time, you know, we say you can't send us it anymore, and it always gets nearer and nearer to that deadline as well. But obviously it's in your interest to send it as soon as you can if that's what you decide to do. And I also make, sorry.
Also, if you send it too close to the deadline, then of course it becomes of less and less value, because ideally you want to receive our comments, our report on your entry at least a couple of weeks before the deadline, so you give yourself time to consider what we've said and maybe to make any changes that you want to make. So if you send in your 3,000 words, you will get a critique of what you've written, and then you want to, as I say, allow yourself time to work on it again before you send it in. So yeah, there's kind of no point in you know, submitting for a critique very, you know, too near the deadline, because you won't have time to act on it, will you?
No, absolutely not. No, that's a good point. So yeah, as with everything, try and prepare and get ahead of the game. Okay, so here's Lisa. So have you got some questions for us?
I've
Lisa?
got some questions, and I feel like they're going to come in fast. So if there's something you've been waiting to hear about, now is your chance. Stick it in a Q&A. But I've got just some quick process ones, Dee, just to knock off my list here. A couple of people are asking if it's only for UK writers.
No, it's international. Anybody writing in English?
Anybody writing in English. So for the Americans there, a couple of people are American. Enter,
no problem.
You're in.
We've had a lot of winners, actually, not just shortlisted, but winners from America and Australia as well in recent years. So yeah, absolutely, not a problem.
Okay, great. Open to all. Related to that, they're asking if you prefer British spelling only, or is any kind of spelling acceptable?
Good spelling is what we'd like.
Good spelling.
And consistent, maybe. So if you start off using, you know, maybe British English spelling, and then halfway through you change to American, that's not so good, and we might pick up on that. So try and be
consistent spelling.
That's the big thing.
Yeah, well, then you can use ProWritingAid, use a consistency tool, and so if you've got half British and half American, it'll flag it for you, and then you can just fix them all up.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so Leigh, I wondered if you could talk a bit about the scoring system. There are a few people that are asking if the scoring system is public, if it's available to entrants, and if scores and feedback are given to the people who enter so that they can grow and learn from that.
Okay, yes, they are actually they are available on the website. I saw them there the other day. So yes, I can certainly run through this. There are different categories, and the judges, the readers, and then the judges will award a certain number of marks for I'll see if I can remember them all. Characterization.
I've got them in front of me, Leigh, if you want me to say. Yeah, okay, then you're not struggling. Yeah, so overall quality of prose is the first one. So that's obviously not just the spelling, but how you actually write, you know, how good you are at handling language. Originality of plot, which, as we mentioned, is mainly from the synopsis. Execution of plot, so as much as we can tell of how you're handling your material, really, in those first 3,000 words. Narrative voice, which I won't go into because we'd be here all night. Plausibility, which is a big thing, because sometimes people can get a little bit carried away, but there again, sometimes crime novels can be very far-fetched if you do the synopsis like Leigh was saying about Hamlet, and it can sound ridiculous, and it's how people handle their material. So does it come across as plausible? Are we willing to suspend disbelief? Then characterization, that's Leigh's favourite, that's what she's talking about. Setting evocation, that's quite an important one. And finally, the more subjective one, if you like, good read factor. So that's 8 criteria that we have. No, we don't give any feedback on entries as they're submitted, but people who are shortlisted do get feedback from the judges.
Do they see their scores at all, or that's all confidential?
That's confidential.
Okay, fine. So how many are longlisted?
Between 10 and 12.
And how many are shortlisted?
Between 5 and 8, but usually 6. Well, there's no hard and fast rules. I mean,
yeah, I like that it's flexible.
If you get some absolutely fantastic ones and it's really hard to make a decision from the long list, then, you know, we want to give people a good chance. So, but 6 is the normal number.
Okay, so somewhere around there. Patrick wants to know how many writers enter every year.
Yeah, everybody always
Sizing up the competition.
And again, this is not something, we don't actually say the actual number, but it is hundreds. And last year, it was hundreds more after lockdown.
Yeah, so, everyone had a bit of time to work on their novels. Okay. Christine wants to know if she has submitted a previous idea, but has now revised it, can she re-enter that same idea?
As long as it's not it wasn't shortlisted, yes, that's absolutely fine. If you entered a novel opening and it was shortlisted, then I'm afraid you can't enter that particular one again. But even if it was longlisted, yes, you can. But we do ask that you work on it and that you do think about it rather than just submitting the same thing. Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay. Is it only for unagented writers?
Yep.
So if you've got an agent, you're out of the running?
Right, so yeah, if you got an agent after the closing date, after the 28th of February, then you'd be okay, but not a publisher. Okay, but if you already have an agent, then no, sorry, this isn't being aimed for you. Like we were saying, it is aimed at unpublished debuts who are trying to make that first step.
Just trying to get there first.
A lot of agents do a lot of very good editorial work on their clients' manuscripts. So again, our kind of aim is to try and make it a fair and level playing field. And so if someone has an agent who might have done quite a lot of work with them on the manuscript, that might give them a bit of an unfair advantage. And I guess I don't know how Dee would feel about this, but I guess what we're really looking for is the kind of raw talent, people who've not had the benefit of any advantages, but just.
Yeah, that's totally great. I mean, having said that, we're perfectly happy for people to use obviously ProWritingAid so as to bring their writing up to scratch. And also if they wanted to use a developmental editor or even a copy editor, there's absolutely no restriction there. So, you know, it's just as they can use the CWA critique service.
These are things that are open to everyone, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone.
And it is in their interest to make sure that they're submitting the best possible version of their 3,000 words, right? So I think it's worth putting the time in. This isn't the kind of competition where you've written your first draft at NaNoWriMo and you're like, well, let's chuck it over and see what happens. Like this is serious business. I think it's worth putting the time in, both self-editing yourself and potentially definitely getting someone else to read it, beta readers, that sort of thing.
One of the benefits of entering the competition is that it does give you a bit of a leg up if you are longlisted or shortlisted to actually, you know, attract the attention of agents and publishers. So, you know, if you already have an agent, it's maybe not of as much potential use.
Yeah, but I think, you know, adding that at the bottom of your email, longlisted by the Debut Dagger, is only going to help you, right?
People will take you seriously.
People will take you seriously.
That's like I read out those quotes before from people who've gone on to be shortlisted or win. Exactly that. It gives you gravitas. It gives it opens doors because people take you seriously.
Yeah, well, and I think it must really boost confidence as well to suddenly, you know, if up until now you're just submitting things and you're not sure where, like to get that sort of validation for something that you've written, even if you don't make the short list, but being on the long list is, you know, that can give the inspiration and impetus that people need.
I remember I was amazed after I was shortlisted first time, and I went to a literary festival, and agents that I didn't know and publishers were coming up to me and introducing themselves, saying, "Oh, hi, Leigh, oh, I enjoyed your book." And it just sort of puts you on the map, really, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
If you are shortlisted or longlisted by the CWA, and agents will know, they'll all know, they keep an eye on all these things, and they will be interested. If you are shortlisted or longlisted for the Debut Dagger, agents will know about this, and they will be interested in you.
Yeah.
Good. So think of this, when you're submitting, there's a lot on the line here, make sure that it's good. So you talked a little bit about, one of the scores that you mentioned was original idea. How important is it to have an original take versus, you know, a more traditional narrative arc that you'd find in a police procedural?
It's like Dee was saying, it's what you do with it, because
absolutely,
so many plots, if you whittle them down, they're kind of the same, aren't they? You know, somebody get killed, who did it, and what are the motives? There are a certain number of motives, but it's what you choose to do with it. I mean, look at Shakespeare. I think only 2 of his plays were original plots, but we don't remember the original, the originators of his stories, or not all of them anyway. But we remember, well, the culture, but we remember Shakespeare's plays. We remember Shakespeare's name because it's what he did with them, isn't it? So it's what you do with the story, really.
Yeah, I would say that, but I would also say that if you have a really original idea, then please, you know, don't be shy. Let's see it.
Yes,
and maybe
tell me, I'm always looking for ideas.
And maybe not just in plot either, but you know, in structure as well. If you have a different way of addressing it, I think that's a really good thing to do, because it will make your entry stand out. And like you say, like we said, we have hundreds of entries, so anything you can do to make your entry stand out, it is good. But yeah, it all comes down to how you actually handle your material. That's the important point.
It is one of the criteria by which we judge, 1 out of 8. So it is helpful if you have an original idea.
Okay. Because Anastasia is saying, are more traditional types of crime novel, like a cozy mystery, are they less likely to be successful because they do sort of follow that more traditional route, or does it just come down to the what results?
No, honestly, it doesn't matter at all what genre. It's all to do with the writing and how you handle your material. So the actual subject, in the sense of, you know, whether it's cozy, or whether it's something quite gruesome, or whether it's psychological, whether it's historical, spy, it doesn't matter. We welcome them all. What's important is, you know, how you handle it, how you handle your craft, really.
Yes, and you have to write what inspires you. You can't think, oh, you know, I think they tend to like police procedurals or cozy crime or psychological thrillers or whatever. I'll write one of those. You have to write what inspires you, and then your writing will be, you know, readable and will have
the best it can be. Yeah. Okay. Got 2 errands here. One says, can you repeat the name of your short story contest?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Marjorie Allingham Short Mystery Prize. And again, if you go to the CWA website and look under competitions and then look under short story, you'll find all the details there. That's for a short story written following a particular definition of a mystery that Marjorie Allingham set, and all the information is there on the webpage. The word count is 3,500, and the deadline is once again the 28th of February at 6 p.m. GMT. And you enter just as you do with the Debut Dagger via the website.
It is actually the last working day in February, so it could potentially be the 29th of February, couldn't it?
It could, but it isn't in 2022. I looked it up. It's a Monday. It's the 28th. Yeah.
Okay, great. So my other Aaron here says he's just looking for a bit more information on the traditional contract rules. So if he's self-published something on Amazon, Does he fall into that category?
If it's in the last 5 years, I'm afraid he's not eligible. We've had to do that because the CWA now welcomes self-published writers as members, and we've always said that the Debut Dagger isn't open to CWA members. So we've had to try and introduce some consistency there. So I'm afraid if he has put something up on Amazon that is, you know, over 20,000 words in more recently than 5 years, and I'm afraid he's not eligible. Sorry.
Okay. Can he wait 5 years and then take it down, wait 5 years and then send it in?
Yeah.
All right. So Erin, 2026 is your year for that story.
Unless we change the rules again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a changing landscape, isn't it? So
I think the rules have changed partly because we now welcome self-published authors into our fold, and so we've had to make some changes. But we try to keep it more or less the same, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is more or less the same. I mean, the traditional contract, you know, I mean, we'd sort of, it had got a little bit woolly around the edges. So maybe for someone who'd had, you know, maybe a children's book published, that used to be okay. But like Leigh was saying before, we decided it has to be a level playing field for everyone. And therefore, no, we you know, traditionally published, afraid not. It's for completely debut authors.
Fiction authors, I think it's still okay for non-fiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Any more?
Helen wants to know if in the scores that you mentioned, is anything weighted differently? Do you, or no? Do you feel like anything actually has more impact in real life?
Well,
that depends on the reader, doesn't it? No, nothing that I could say. I mean, each reader will take things slightly differently, I guess, but that's partly why we have paired readers for each entry, because, you know, say something really appeals to one and they think it's fantastic and they give it a really high score, but their paired reader not so keen for whatever reason. I mean, it is subjective. Even though you have a score sheet with criteria, it can be subjective. So what we say is that if there's anyone who's got one score out of the two which would put them in contention for the long list, then we introduce a third reader. So that way, you know, we make it as fair as we possibly can. But no, when we look at the criteria, no, none have more weighting than another.
Okay, great. Patrick submitted one novel already, but now he says he thinks it was a bit more of a practice run and that his next book that he's working on now will be much better. So when he submits that, is there anything that he should say to say this is actually the one that I think should have more consideration, or will they just be,
no,
they'll both be looked at by their readers?
You can't enter into sort of individual communication like that. You simply enter it via the website, and there's no opportunity to say anything like that. So I'm afraid no. If he's already entered it and paid his £36 and he wants to enter another and pay another £36,
another £36, but you double your chances, right? You never know.
Yeah. And I want to say something we've not mentioned as well. I mean, we major obviously on the fact that the entries are seen by agents and by publishers, but the winner also gets £500, which isn't to be sneezed at.
Yeah, £500 can go a long way when you're, you know, and I would imagine that a lot of these authors will put that money towards editing and like really nice cover design and all of those other things that, you know, can add up a bit when you're publishing a book. A quick question here. I think it's similar to the swearing question. What's the feeling on having sex scenes in, or the sex life of a detective mentioned, if it's related to the plot, as in manipulation of the detective? Would you, I assume all of that is fine.
Of course it's fine.
Yeah, of course
it's related to the plot, that's absolutely fine. If you have a novel where, you know, in every chapter there's a kind of fairly gratuitous bit of bonking, personally, I would find that a bit boring, actually. And I think, yes, if it drives the narrative forward, because, for example, let's say the reader knows that the detective is being manipulated, and then yes, fair enough. I mean, personally, I'm not a huge fan of sex in crime novels, but like with the swearing, it's not a no-no. It wouldn't affect my judgment. It's just not,
No. I am a fan of sex in any novel, in fact. Which just goes to show how different people have different views on these things. But I think the important thing is, like Leigh, that it does in some way forward the narrative, that there's some connection, perhaps.
Maybe it tells you more about the character, that they're a bit promiscuous or they're not, whatever. But I think as a reader and a judge, you have to be aware that of your own preferences and things you are not so keen on, and you have to kind of step outside of those really and judge the novel, the submission, the opening on its own merits as far as you can. Obviously, you know, unconscious bias and all that is a big buzzword nowadays, isn't it? But we have to try and be objective. And so although I'm not a huge fan of sex in crime novels, partly because I think sex is so often so badly written in novels. It doesn't mean that I would mark anybody down because of it.
Yeah, and I interviewed an author during our romance week, and actually I can't remember who it was, but I just remember her saying that if you're going to have a sex scene, make sure that something is revealed in that sex scene that couldn't be revealed in any other way, so that it's actually relevant to your story. And I just thought, oh, that's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, it is. It sounds good to me.
Yeah. So that's it. We're out of time. We need you guys to leave us with what's the most important thing that these authors, if you imagine that this room, everybody that's here is going to submit, what is the best advice that you can give them?
Okay, Leigh, you go first, talking about the writing, and I'll come in with the process.
Yes, I would say it sounds almost contradictory, because I would say as a writer, you have to trust yourself, but I think you also need to listen to other people's advice. You don't have to take it. You don't have to agree with it, but you need to listen to what other people say and see if, that makes sense. But ultimately, I think write what inspires you, enjoy your writing. Writing is an all-consuming activity. Eugene Ionesco said, a writer never has a vacation. For a writer, life consists of writing or thinking about writing. So if you're not going to absolutely love writing and have a passion for it, then you're going to spend an awful lot of time doing something you're not enjoying. So yeah, just love what you're doing and good luck.
Yeah.
Keep writing.
And on the hard side, as far as the debut dagger goes, I'm afraid I would just say, make sure you follow the rules.
Yeah.
Okay,
boring, but necessary.
Okay, everybody that's here, if you're gonna enter you have to declare it now. If you're gonna enter into the debut dagger, write yes in the chat, and then that is you making a commitment to do it. Who's gonna do it? Yes, yes. Susan, yes. Patrick, yes. Josie, yes. Anastasia, yes. All right, this is no go backsies. This is like a hard, solid commitment that you're gonna do it.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah. A couple of people are saying not this year. They're gonna work on it and plan it and enter the 2023 ones, and that's fine. Take the time you need, but there's a lot of yeses there.
Yes.
Yeah. 2 times from Patrick.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, this has been so helpful. I feel like the idea of entering your book for an award is quite scary, and I feel like you've made it all feel much more approachable and less scary. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I hope that the next winner is here in this room. Wouldn't that be exciting?
That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
I know. All right, great. Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you so much, Dee, and thank you so much, Leigh. Really appreciated having you here.
Okay, thanks.
See everybody next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.